Well, while Eric's bringing the screen up, I just wanted to acknowledge that this LunchMAR series in the past, we've heard about some great new decision support tools like the BREN program and other multiple benefits of FloodMAR. And today, we'd like to use this forum to advance one of the founding concepts of the FloodMAR network, which is to encourage collaboration among network members and leverage resources to advance the science and practice of FloodMAR. And today we're going to particularly focus on-farm recharge. And we've really set this presentation up to rather than presenting definitive research or project results, my colleagues and I are going to provide really a summary of information that we've gathered to date from farmers and water districts who are practicing on-farm recharge, and share some initial analyses and data with you so that you can see the kinds of information that we're collecting, and really inviting all of you to help define additional research that could be performed using this kind of data, and actually join with us or share. We're happy to share some of this data for others to extend and expand our knowledge of on-farm recharge. We have a network of ongoing recharge sites where we've been learning from, and we would like to make sure that the knowledge that these sites offer can really be leveraged by all of the network, rather than waiting for one individual organization to come out with results. Next slide. In 2011, sustainable conservation was introduced to the idea of on-farm recharge at the invitation of Don Cameron at Terra Nova Farms and Phil Bichond from Bichond and Associates, who were working together on Don's property in Fresno County to monitor his recharge. And we were invited in to help develop an outreach program to share the lessons learned from field site studies, such as the one that they were performing. And this work has continued to grow for us as other farmers try out the idea, and other irrigation districts see the potential for maintaining groundwater supplies through use of private farmland. And through our industry and agency networks, we've continued to learn from farmers that are practicing these types of methods, which now number in the several hundred on several tens of thousands of acres. And we think that the knowledge that can be gained and the questions that are need to be answered really come from these farmers and irrigation districts. And that's why we're sharing with you today what we've been learning, and hopefully making it more accessible to those that want to answer some of these questions. Next slide. Since 2011, also our recharge team has worked with these various partners to explore their questions and better define the potential of on-farm recharge. So we've done on-farm engineering studies to determine what's the cost of pumping and moving water on farms. We have a study on that. We've done more in-depth studies comparing on-farm recharge to recharge basins operated by irrigation districts. And we've also been looking at crop tolerance to flooding to minimize crop health and yield risks, working with the Almond Board of California, as well as with private consultants, and then supporting and interpreting recharge suitability mapping. The Land IQ map shown in the right-hand picture here, developed with support from the Almond Board of California, is something that we see as really critical for helping irrigation districts and farmers determine if their lands are suitable. And there's a whole new range of ideas emerging around how we can best characterize those site suitability characteristics. And then on water quality, we've been working with a variety of environmental justice and technical groups to identify what the concerns are with on-farm recharge. And Taylor's working to develop a guidance document, which is in draft form right now and out for review. We'll be sharing shortly, the first of the year. And then of course, policy is ongoing, and we feel that policy decisions should be based on field experience. And so the knowledge that we're all gaining from on-the-ground practice is really critical to both identifying incentives as well as protecting environmental and social objectives. Next. We've been really pleased to work with the Department of Water Resources to support the development of the LunchMAR concept and co-coordinate the Research Advisory Committee over the last couple of years, and the research and data development plan that came out of that. Next, please. Of those various implementation factors that the committee looked at, there's really two areas where the practice of on-farm recharge can really help to answer some of the key questions and overcome some of those barriers. And so these on-farm recharge sites where we've been monitoring and the ones where irrigation districts have been collecting data that we've been helping them assess are really the key places where this knowledge can be gained. Next. On-farm recharge is continuing to grow. The Public Policy Institute of California, in their evaluation of on-farm recharge, found that 50% of the 64 agricultural districts that were surveyed said that they are currently using or see the potential to expand on-farm cropland recharge, and 30% of those districts also said they're currently using or see the potential to expand fallow land recharge. So both active farmland and fallow land recharge are expected to grow as GSAs seek ways to increase their groundwater supply. And we're currently supporting 2 of those districts in their, with the development of their recharge programs, and they're then sharing back with us the success they're having with those growers in terms of how many are participating. We're also working with 5 districts with our groundwater recharge assessment tool to help them plan for the potential for expanded on-farm recharge as well as other recharge methods. And all these districts are interested in partnering with researchers and evaluating and identifying new recharge opportunities. So we're happy to make connections to put people together with some of those folks that are interested. Next. I just wanted to share with you the results from Madera Irrigation District, one of the districts that we partner closely with through the last several years. In 2017, they started their recharge program and encouraged farmers to take water for recharge. And then in 2019, when we had water again, they made the same program available both during the winter season, which really is the January, February period, and in the fall after harvest and when flood releases from reservoirs make more water available. And next, Eric. What we can see here is the significant rise in interest and participation by growers and the number of acres participating in these recharge programs in both the winter and fall programs, and the amount of recharge increase that's occurred. And for Madera Irrigation District, this has been really important because their entire dedicated recharge basin capacity in 2019 for collecting water was 8,000 acre-feet. They have now surpassed their dedicated infrastructure by encouraging farmers to participate with more than 9,000 acre-feet in the winter and another 1,700 acre-feet recharged in the fall period. So growing interest, and each of these growers is a source of information for us all to learn on what's being done. Next. This is just a map of Madera Irrigation District showing where the water went on those farms in that fall program. And most notably is the quantities of water that were being applied on these acres. Importantly, most of the farmers that were participating were putting fairly small amounts of water on because they're still trying to get comfortable with the idea of applying water on active farmland. A couple of farmers are up to the two acre-feet per acre, and that was just in a very short time window. But most farmers are still wanting to learn more and understand more about the risks to their crop and water quality risks and other factors, including greater incentives perhaps to do more work. So we're using this growing interest to document what farmers are doing at both these recharge district scale projects, but also at several monitoring sites, which you're about to hear more about. And we're really interested in, from your perspective, in what kinds of questions would you like to see answered from sites where we can be doing this kind of research. So I think we have a poll question next. Or read, thank you. You'll close the poll when we get enough answers.
Yeah, I'm gonna wait a few more seconds. We have quite the range of responses, and so I'll give it a few more seconds so people can have a chance to weigh in, and then I'll share the results with everyone. So.
And great.
Yep. 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to end it now, and here you go.
Great. Well, strong interest in the water quality effects. That's great. And certainly the soil crop suitability and site preparation were good. These are all excellent questions and areas that we're working on and would love to engage with others. And before I turn it over to my colleague, Lottie, I want to repeat the invitation. As you're hearing what some of the results we have right now, we really are encouraging us to use this as a network and encourage those folks that see information we're collecting that they'd like to build on, please contact us so that we can work together to do that. So I will turn it over now to Lottie.
Thank you, Daniel.
Next slide, please.
Next slide. So wanting to learn more in depth about what it really means to do on-farm recharge on a working farming operation was really important to us. The red dots represent the monitoring sites that we established. As far north in San Joaquin County, and as far south as Fresno County. We really wanted to take a look at the major crops. And next slide, please. We worked with Don Cameron and a few other growers to really establish 8 monitoring sites, a total of about 350 acres. Quite a bit of water was recharged, not as much as some of the districts, but quite significant. The key questions we really wanted to figure out is, how much water can you apply on each of these crop types? How quickly can you bring farming equipment back there? The volume, rate, depth of water applied. A number of these questions that you normally would not be able to figure out. Next slide, please. It was important that each of the sites we had access to water, flood release water especially, and that each of these sites had flood irrigation valves at a minimum. The majority had dual systems, both flood and also drip irrigation or micro sprinkler. We wanted to make sure that there was at least the opportunity to have a treatment and a control on the same field. In some cases, we had the control field, the observation field separate from the treatment field. But we found that it was difficult to sometimes have as much control over each one of those sites. Next slide, please. So the types of information we wanted to gather on a working farming operation were, remote access, telemetry from moisture sensors and pressure transducers to collect a variety of information that we could read online. But more important, we needed to really get some context for all of the data that we were receiving to understand how this water was applied, when was regular irrigation also happening, because those could be observed with the sensors we had out there. The timing for fertilization, I noticed that a lot of people are interested in water quality impacts. We wanted to know how that was being managed. And of course, one indicator of crop health would be yield. Was yield affected? So especially when you look at the treatment and the control, knowing if there were any impacts long term. So that was really important to us. Next slide, please. Now, we learned a lot from working on the sites, and a lot of these have really informed how we can get this type of setup working fairly reliably. We had quite a bit of expense in the start. Wildlife chewing on cables, like you see in the top image there, that was a regular problem. And sometimes coyotes would actually pull on the cables, and we had to replace the sensors. So huge expense that we were able to address. Another challenge, example of challenge was having things like pressure transducers, which measure the height of ponding, somewhere in the middle of the rows and get run over by equipment. So we had to find just the right, reposition some of the sensors, harden some of the sensors with proper conduit, steel conduit. And so over time, we've been able to strike the balance really well between an experimental site that where we can get good experimental results with a working farming operation that a grower was happy with. Next slide, please. So at this stage, we have sites that are really well set up. The most important element is having trust with a grower community that is willing to work with us and share information. Here's an example of Don really explaining how high ponding occurred during one of the recharge events. In general, he did try to have the ponding not overtop the berms, but in this case that happened. We also have the opportunity to do education and outreach through our farmer-to-farmer network. Really important to have others come and see what types of results we're getting and actually walk the fields to see how a lot of these practices were done. In terms of research, remember I mentioned, crop health. It's really important. So we had oxygen sensors, and an example of the results we got from that actually turned into tangible research that we're able to share is what Eric, my colleague, is going to talk about. That's just one example, but we have a number of other types of data that we've acquired that could be opportunities to better learn and partner in how to improve recharge. Next slide, please.
Great, thanks, Lottie. So as Lottie said, we did some work on better understanding the impacts of recharge, and we partnered with Bashand and Associates on this work. They know quite a bit about recharge, and they developed this report for us where they studied a very large number of different factors. But what we're going to focus on today is soil oxygen and how that changes with different types of water applications, from drip irrigation to flood irrigation to recharge. The reason we want to focus on soil oxygen is it's a proxy for soil health. So in doing this work, Bajan and Associates tried to figure out if there was available data around oxygen thresholds that would be problematic for plants. And even though we focused on various crops, at the time they were only able to find a 5 kilopascal threshold for oak and a 10 kilopascal threshold for almonds, where some studies found that going below those oxygen thresholds were problematic to soil health. So those were the two thresholds we looked at in the study.
Eric, just to clarify, to soil health or to crop health?
Sorry, the crop health. I'm working also on soil health, so I kind of just came out of a meeting talking about that. So to crop health, not to soil health. Thanks for catching that. So this is some of the data that we collected. This is at a 10 centimeter depth reading. So in red, we have the percent saturation, and in blue, we have the oxygen, soil oxygen. So not surprisingly, as the percent saturation increases, the soil oxygen decreases. One thing to note is that there is, the green line indicates when soil percent saturation starts to drop off, and there's a small delay before the soil oxygen starts to come back. And even though we're just looking at a recharge event in this case, that was true across all 3 forms of water application, so drip irrigation, flood, and recharge. What's notable, though, is that both the flood irrigation and the recharge events were actually very similar to one another in terms of how the soil oxygen responded. In either case, there were times when at the different monitoring sites, we might see the soil oxygen dip below that 10 or 5 kPa threshold. But we didn't see that the drip irrigation never went below the 5 kPa threshold. But that helps tell us that if we manage the recharge field similar to how we might manage a flood irrigated field, one of the conclusions we came out of that report was that, that is probably good guidelines, that we have some good information there. So as part of the study, we wanted to understand what other factors might correlate with soil oxygen. So some things that surprisingly didn't correlate with the soil oxygen values, and one was soil texture, but that was actually because of all the monitoring sites, they all had fairly similar sandy soil types. So we probably just didn't have enough variability. More surprisingly was soil temperature. We would have expected that soil temperature increased, then you would have an increase in soil oxygen, or you have a decrease in soil oxygen, but we didn't see that. And then the volumetric water content and volumetric air content also surprisingly didn't vary. And that might partly be because we only have 1 year of data analyzed so far. And Taylor will talk more about that, what we're doing after this 2017 year that we studied. Some things that did correlate with soil oxygen was the percent saturation, as we saw in the previous graph, but also the oxygen depletion rate. So how quickly oxygen depleted. And then also the maximum surface water depth, as well as the water application duration. Those both also correlated, where the greater those were, the lower the soil oxygen was. And likely the mechanism was simply that they're creating a barrier to oxygen. So Taylor will be helping us, we'll be sharing what we've done since this 2017 study.
Thanks, Eric. So in terms of next steps, we sort of see 2 parts here. One is to update the analysis that Eric just walked us through with new data, which would be worthwhile, especially as we continue collecting monitoring data with the addition of new monitoring sites. And then the second part would be to explore new questions through identifying opportunities through forming new research partnerships, but also by incorporating some of the other sustainable conservation data resources. And so those are not only the telemetry data that we've been talking about, but also other related factors that we've been collecting from interviews with growers and site management. And so it's worth noting that the sensors are collecting summer irrigation information. And so we have data to compare several years of irrigation season oxygen levels. Next slide. And so this graph is just to show a snapshot of what the 2017 summer irrigation oxygen monitoring data looks like when paired with irrigation information that we gathered from our interviews with growers. And just again to emphasize that it is irrigation data, summer irrigation, not recharge. And we highlighted the 5 to 10 kilopascal range for oxygen monitoring because, as Eric had said, some research suggested that exposure in this range can impact crop health. And so moving forward, we'll install paired sensors to analyze soil characteristics in recharge versus control fields, and then also have information from growers that includes information on yields, nutrient application, observed changes to crop health, and recharge practices. And so in addition to observing how recharge impacts soil characteristics, we might also be able to answer questions on implications of recharge on crop tolerance and salt mobilization. Next slide. And so now we have a poll, because that's just one question that might be worth exploring. But now, we'd really like to hear from you to get a sense of what research questions might interest you the most.
So we'll give people a few seconds. We're getting some responses and I'll share that in a little bit. And it looks like a couple of people also added other responses in the chat. So you'll be able to see what are some other questions that you might want to consider for research. I'm going to wait just 5 more seconds, give people a chance to respond, and then I'll share the results. Okay. There you go, Taylor.
All right, so good number of responses on the effect of recharge on crop health or yields over time. That's something that we're definitely interested in looking at. Also, implications of recharge and how it might impact drinking water. And yeah, so maybe others in the chat we can look at later to see what some of those other questions might have been. Oh, I muted myself. If you go to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so just, a final update and to kind of circle back around with the resources that sustainable conservation has for continuing research. In addition to the data and the rich historical data that Eric and I and Daniel and Lottie have covered, we have good relationships with growers, site-specific historical knowledge, and experience that can benefit LunchMAR research and development plan priorities. Next slide. And so now we'd just like to open it to discussion to see what other questions, kind of explore the other ones that you might want to see answered through this data, and also how the LunchMAR network could support this type of field site monitoring and data sharing.
We could start with some of the questions too. We've got a number of folks asked.
Yeah, I think that's fine to start with some of the questions in the chat, Daniel. And just first wanted to say thank you for your presentations, and see if there is something specific that you want to respond to. And then also just want to invite participants to raise their hand and ask questions in person, so we can have more of a dialogue.
Yeah. So I saw there's a couple of questions that we can probably answer pretty quickly from the questions, just for clarification. Julia Grimm asked about the figures assuming 100% of the applied water that isn't evaporated or taken up recharges the shallow aquifer. And yes, Julia, the way that the numbers I reported for Madera Irrigation District are calculated is that those are after subtracting evapotranspiration. And so it's the amount of water that moves past the root zone, but is not necessarily retained in the groundwater subbasin, because we're not attempting to model the transport of that past where within the vadose zone where it actually goes. So that's hopefully answers that question. And then let's see, the question about from Chelsea Spear about are there results of how the groundwater responded after these recharge events? Only one of our sites at the Lodi location, there we were able to coordinate with some of the surrounding wells and where there was monitoring done. And in that case, one of the big questions was, because the site was close to the McCollum River, there was concern that water being recharged might be going back to the river. What we actually found was that the mounding effect of the recharge showed rise in groundwater wells away from the river, suggesting that both the river and the recharge were moving north to an area of groundwater depletion. So that was helpful to know that that recharge was actually benefiting the overdraft in that area. I will say that in some of our modeling with DWR now in Merced, there's a significant portion of the water that's recharged that actually does return back to the river through modeling that's being done by Woodard and Curran, showing that base flows or subsequent years can benefit from that return flow back to the river as well. And then some other research questions to add. Chelsea also asked, have we looked into or observed deposition of fine soil may need to be removed periodically if this is done over the long term? Lottie, do you have anything on that? I have not heard, or we have not seen it long enough to know.
No, we have not observed recharge on the same site long enough to know. But I did notice there were some deposits of fine salts at the soils at the Lodi site. But every year there's some tillage done to the roads as a part of recharge maintenance that will incorporate that. So it hasn't been a major issue.
Yeah. And then Nathaniel Roth's question about, looked like the oxygen pattern lagged the irrigation. And I'm assuming that was on the figure that Taylor showed, or since it was about irrigation. Taylor, do you want to comment on that one?
Yeah, sure. That was only the case for one of the dips, and that might be due to a reporting error. So might be some room to be done with helping in accuracy of reporting irrigation.
But I think, Eric, you did point out, though, that oxygen recovery does lag after the water is turned off. So there is a number of hours or day or so before that response curve starts to rise in oxygen level.
Right. So I don't think we studied this, but I wonder if it's a similar mechanism of the delay.
Nathaniel, do you want to comment if you're on the line there, or add anything else?
Yeah, sorry, I actually tried to correct myself on it. I noticed, I was thinking that it should have lagged, but I was observing that it looked like it led the irrigation, the flood irrigation. And I was wondering if there was an explanation for that. And if you had a sensor timing issue, that could certainly be a piece of it.
That was, Taylor, that was to your point, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. And then Khaled Bali wanted to know, what was the typical duration of recharge, days or weeks?
Yeah, that was about 5 days typically of recharge, followed by 5 to 7 days of dry down, repeated cycles of that. The sandier fields could tolerate up to 7 days of recharge, but it was mostly around 5 days.
Good. Great. think the rest of the comments, actually, no, there's one more here from Kamyar. It's a question. The others are research questions, which we can go to next. But one more question from Kamyar about, you have general guidance on monitoring design and protocols for those who are planning LunchMAR pilot projects. Lottie, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, we are developing a guidance document to make recommendations on exactly those questions. We're currently working on one with Almond Board of California now, and we will be expanding that effort.
Actually, you know what, Lottie, I think maybe I've misread it, but it's monitoring design and protocols. So this is to do further monitoring sites.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
What we're doing is guiding farmers on how to do recharge, but this is specifically on the monitoring question.
Oh, the design of the monitoring design question.
Right. And I would say we're not in the position to provide guidance to that. I think that's really a better question answered by some of the research partners in the LunchMAR network. What we've done is shared with you how we have set it up. You know, if that's of value to share with others to document that, that would be good for us to know. But we also, you know, we tried to do this in most economical manner we could. There certainly are much more elaborate monitoring designs and protocols that are possible. I think that's maybe a question for this discussion is how much is necessary and what kind of questions are you asking?
Daniel, it looks like there's another question from Don Wayne with regard to the canal water used for recharge. How does this affect growers' water allocation? Do you want to address that question?
I can answer for the Madera Irrigation District, which is one, and actually for the Tulare, where we work in partnership with those two districts. Those districts make that water available as part of their district's water rights and diversion quantities. And so they both view the water as a benefit to the whole district. And so they've been offering that water, either incentivizing that water through lower costs or encouraging farmers to take that water voluntarily. It doesn't go against the growers' water allocation. In fact, in those districts, currently those districts don't have water allocations. Farmers pay for the water that they use. But under GSA, I think that's a really important question in terms of how much water and how to incentivize farmers to take this water when that water benefits the entire basin and not just that farmer. You know, the water doesn't stay under that farm, and in fact, much of it might even leave the district. So the question really has to be about, you know, how do you incentivize and reward based on where the water ultimately benefits, and that might be in the district or even neighboring districts. Lottie, anything other about the actual monitoring sites? Anything about water allocations, where that water comes from?
All of the water allocations were flood release waters that were offered mostly free to the growers to do as they will. So, like you said, it didn't count against the regular. This was usually done after the regular irrigation season.
Did you want to address some of the suggested research questions that participants offered? I think there are 2 or 3, one related to funding. There was another one related to leaching. I'm looking for it again. Leaching of fertilizers and pesticides below the root zone. Any thoughts about the suggested questions that you might be able to explore with your work? You're muted, Daniel.
Thank you. I think let's talk about the ones that are specific to sort of the monitoring data first, and then we can talk about some of the bigger questions that are being asked around economic implications and cost incentives and that sort of thing. So even just looking at the poll, the biggest question there that people thought of using monitoring sites for was the question around crop health or yields. And yeah, thank you, Larit. Lottie, do you want to talk a little bit about, to the extent that we've been able to interview farmers about health and yields, and what other questions and directions might be possible given our conversations with the almond board?
Yeah, with yields over time, there's, we don't have the same consistency. We know that year to year yields might change. That might have nothing to do with recharge. It's the more replications probably would give us a better indication of in the same year, looking across the board. And that would require more monitoring sites to get a more robust data set. So that would be probably the most important need to really take a look at yield. And yield might, the effects, if there are adverse effects, that it might occur over a number of years. I know that there has been some research on that. The challenge is also how much resources do we have to consistently measure those effects over a number of years. But so far, with almonds and with grapevines, we've really seen no adverse effects, especially when recharge was done in the dormant season.
And Lottie, the other piece of that we've been talking about is how to detect risk before problems occur. You want to talk anything about the conversations with the pathologists with the almond board?
Yes, we looked at the diseases that are most likely to occur during under similar conditions to recharge. Plant recharge, of course, is a very different animal from overt flooding, but those high probability diseases, we talked about having a closer monitoring program for those over time to somehow lessen the risk, and probably also to manage that with looking at what other types of crop protection measures can be used. So those are all areas that I think need additional work.
Any other people want to comment on the crop health side? I mean, we'd love to use this conversation not to be just us answering what we've done, but suggestions. So around crop health and yields, are there others? And certainly UC Davis, I know I saw Thomas is on the line. I don't know if Helen is, but that there's certainly been work on crop health with the almond board. We're not aware of a whole lot of other work elsewhere on other crops. Some on pistachios, I believe, and walnuts. Anybody on the line want to comment on any other crop health or yield research being done currently where we could join efforts, or interest in joining efforts to leverage field data?
This is Khaled Bali with the Kearney Ag Center. We, the UCANR and ARS, we've been doing groundwater recharge on alfalfa, and we're looking at the at the crop yield and its impact on quality.
Great. Which crops did you say, Khalid?
Alfalfa.
Alfalfa. Okay. Great. Great. I know that on alfalfa, there's a lot of discussion about sort of different north and south in the valley in terms of temperature and dormancy and the amount of water that can be applied. So I'm assuming, are you looking both San Joaquin Valley at the Kearney Center, or do you have any work further north in Sacramento Valley?
So far, we've been just looking at the Fresno County area. We're looking at starting a recharge site up north with another advisor from the university. And we've been looking at different ways at recharge, utilizing surface irrigation systems for recharge, and we've been applying anywhere from 6 to 7 acre feet between February and April.
Okay, great. And I know that Helen Dalkey's had some significantly even more water than that applied further north on some alfalfa fields. Yeah, great. I think one of the key messages that we've been trying to learn from the farmers that are doing this is, how far are they willing to push these limits? They tend to know, what their crops can handle, or based on sort of historic experience, and they're helping all of us understand what they're willing to try, and perhaps help us identify what the research questions are to expand those boundaries. The next most popular research result or interest was in the salt mobilization and the impact on drinking water. And I saw Monica Baracate also asked about nitrates, of course, being related to that. And we'll put a link in the chat to a study that we did with CDFA support back in 2017, 18, where we did look at nitrate leaching and salt leaching. And that study did show at a number of sites that there was significant leaching of salts and nutrients. In fact, as much as 80% out of the monitored zone, which was down to 30 feet, but that the quantity of water applied could actually dilute that loading back to the level of the background levels in the groundwater if you repeatedly recharge in the same site. And that's something that will be in the water quality guidance document. I believe that's coming out is the emphasis on recharging in the same site rather than moving around from site to site, because every new site that you recharge at, there's the risk of mobilizing more of those legacy loading, both the salts and the fertilizers.
So Daniel, I'm going to have to pause you as we are at the end of our hour. And usually what we do is we close the meeting with open mic if anybody has any announcements or any related efforts that they want to highlight, and we'll close the meeting. And then if people want to stay a little longer or add their comments in the chat, please do so, and then we'll of course summarize all that, so you'll have people's participants' comments and any additional questions that we can follow up on. So I'll turn it over to you, Jenny, with any announcements, anyone you want to highlight, and then we'll close.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Daniel, Lottie, Eric, and Taylor. Great presentation. If folks want to give a little shout out, they can raise their hand for a virtual high five or use the clap button as a thank you. Now we have about 30 seconds for announcements. For folks that weren't able to participate in the Southwest Extreme Precipitation Symposium, the presentations are available online. I'm adding a link to the chat. There were some really great MAR related topics, so I encourage folks to go check out some of the presentations. Again, in the chat is a link to registering for our network formulation workshop. So please register if you're interested in rolling up your sleeves to design what the LunchMAR network can look like. And with that, I'll open that up for any other announcements that people want to add via video or chat. And thanks again, everybody.
Yeah, this is Kamiar. I just added to the chat information about a LunchMAR webinar that our colleague Graham Fogg is going to present on November 10th. And it's part of the Arizona Hydrologic Society's monthly meeting. And the information there is there, plus the registration link.
Thanks, Camier.
Hi, this is Dong Wang. I'm with USDA Agricultural Research Service located in Parlier in California. Parlier. We are starting a new project partially through a NRCS for the Kavir River Basin to look at the groundwater recharge. It's part of the SEEP project, if anybody ever heard of it. It's Conservation Effects Assessment Program. And one of the main focus is to look at the surface water, groundwater interactions. And we are setting up some monitoring stations to look at the ET because the majority of the cropland is citrus. So we are monitoring ET and also getting some assessment of irrigation water being applied in the basin to do how much of a recharge is going to be occurring in that watershed. So it's the beginning stage of that. So there will be more data coming out of it going forward. Just to let you know.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I don't think we put up a contact. Is there a way for people to contact us if they have further questions?
I put her email and website in the chat, but it might have gotten lost.
Okay.
Yep,
Thank
Eric shared an email, and we'll share any additional questions, comments in the chat in our meeting notes and share this with you, Daniel, and team if there's anything that's unanswered. But we'll have meeting notes that capture the chat as well as the presentation topic.
Great.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Ran a little long. Thanks for hanging on. If anyone else wants to turn on cameras, turn on mics, and just say a hello, the official part of the meeting is over.
Thank you.
Good.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
It's always
you.
interesting.
Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Take care.
Hey, Jesse.
Thank you from here too.
Yeah.
Yes, Julia.
Hey, Tim, how are you doing? Oh, he just jumped off. Yeah, so Daniel, my question was, kind of rhetorical in that I think as people look at doing more pilot projects, LunchMAR pilot projects, it'd be nice if they at least have some guidance on how maybe by adding at not too much extra costs, additional monitoring to their project that could generate data on the topics you were presenting today.
Yeah, and I think that's the question: is what are the priority topics? We found for ourselves it's very expensive to maintain this equipment, and that's just one step. The other part is analyzing the data, and controlling it against a control site, as well as year-to-year variability that we see. And so it's not a simple, depends on the question you're trying to answer. If monitoring is how much water did you put on the field and did you notice any yield response, that might be fairly simple. But if it's oxygen levels correlated with crop effects, that's really becomes a quite complex project. And one of the reasons we wanted to have this open this up today is, we're at the point of trying to decide, do we keep collecting this data? We have to raise, private funds for this from our donors. And it really is the subject of much larger research projects typically. And we'd like to figure out, is there some, practical scale at which this information should be collected, like you're saying, Kamyar, that isn't a full-on research project.
And part of it might be maybe, and this might be something that the FloodMAR network can help with, is letting the community know when someone is seriously looking at doing a pilot project, and then maybe inviting them to partner. So maybe in my pilot project, you know, I have a particular interest, so I'm going to be monitoring for that. But, you know, there's a lot of cost associated with doing a pilot in general. So if other partners know that, oh, they're doing a pilot in this area, and if for an incremental cost, we could work with them to add sensors to monitor other things that might not be in their immediate interest, that could be helpful.
Yep. No, that's exactly, I mean, that was our thought was, you know, we already have these pilots going. Is there something else that people want to ask or question at these sites? And we're happy maintaining the relationships with the farmers and maintaining the field sites if others want to bring in different instrumentation or, you know, do analysis of our data to come up with other conclusions, you know, compare different data points in it. So, yeah, we just feel like the biggest cost is sunk in getting the equipment in the ground and tracking it, making sure that, you know, the animals aren't eating the wires. So,
Yep.
and from there, the data is online, and, you know, people can pull it remotely, really. So we'll be curious to see what kind of response we get. But I think your point is, you know, can we extend what we've learned in some sort of guidance to others if they happen to want to do this? Was that what your question was when you said guidance?
Yeah, so guidance, and so in general, what does it take to do the monitoring? But also, I'm thinking just info exchange and having a clearinghouse where people know who's doing what and how they might be able to piggyback on their work.
Clearinghouse is exactly what kind of the seed we were hoping to plant today was, you know, we've got these sites, anybody interested in this area, these topics, you know, let's, you know, it's a matchmaking, put people together.
Right. Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Good work, Daniel.
Any others?
Exciting stuff.
Thanks again, Lottie.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. And I'm looking forward to our December 10th kickoff. And I think that's, you know, before it was a recommendation in the R&D plan. And now we're actually poised to take that next big step.
Yeah.
LunchMAR,
40
thanks
people
to
signed up
Jenny.
already.
How many, Jenny?
40.
Good.
And we just started getting word out, you know, Friday, I think. So 40 feet.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we kind of jumped the gun with this session, but hopefully it's, you know, an example of the kind of thing that we could do together as the network.
All right.
Daniel, can I ask you a quick question? It's not related, but when I was reading your bio, I did not remember that your graduate work was in human ecology. And I was just curious what that is, because my son and I were looking at majors and he was looking at social ecology, and I thought, I mean, it sounds fascinating combination, but I was just wondering what that was like for you. What were the kind of questions you study in that field?
Well, the big question was, you know, why do land managers make the decisions they do about their resource management? And how do we understand their cultural perceptions as well as their economic capabilities to make decisions about resource management? So, you know, the very work we're doing here is the great applied use of it is, you know, why are more farmers not doing recharge? What's the perceived risks and challenges? And that's pretty much how we've structured our program that Lottie was working on, is how do we assess the problems, the issues, and that are human as opposed to natural resource management. We can come up with great technologies for doing recharge, but how do we get people to actually practice them? So yeah, I mean, human ecologists focus on a whole lot of different sort of decision making around resource management, or our ecological management. But, yeah, I'd be happy to discuss more.
That relates, I'm hearing that it relates to the culture and potentially not just resources, but maybe cultural values around that would be important.
Yeah, my dissertation was on.
Go ahead.
My dissertation was on the difference between Mexican, Anglo, and Japanese strawberry farmers and their cultural backgrounds and learning processes and access to resources, and how they made decisions about soil management in Elkhorn Slough area, erosion issues. And then how do you then develop programs that equitably make resources available to different cultural ethnic groups? That's what I did at NRCS for many years.
Thanks.
And because you brought up resource management, to what extent does that involve understanding, humans understanding ecosystem services and how they can leverage that to their benefit?
It has a lot to do with perception of what the resources are. Does someone see? In my case, it was, what is a resource problem? Many people don't see a problem where others see a problem. So, or benefit being the reverse of that in terms of ecosystem services. So it's, where do we acquire our perception of what is a problem or what's a benefit? And, both our educational programs, our incentive programs, are they targeted appropriately so that people recognize the benefit? Not everyone's going to see the same benefit from a self-interest perspective, even if they visually can see it. We grapple with this with corporations all the time. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
A good example, or an example, is it wasn't too long ago, maybe a decade, and the concept of water, quote, leakage from conveyance canals was considered a waste of water. And people went through great contortions to line their canals, or, as a way of water use efficiency. And now it's almost, we put that on its head, and now appreciate that what was considered leaky or wasteful was actually, or could be, a resource benefit.
Exactly.
Right.
And we've done a lot of, in our education and outreach to more general population, has been, when you see a field being recharged, that's not waste. That's a natural resource management strategy, because everyone's been taught to think drip sprinklers are what you should see in fields, micro sprinklers, and now we're flooding fields, and people driving by comment, that looks like waste.
Yeah, the question is the incentive, because you have a private incentive to, you're paid for water, and whatever is recharged is a community benefit. And linking the farmers, having an incentive to recharge, they want to make sure that there's somehow a long-term benefit to that.
Seems like it's the incentives, but also just having like really a systems perspective and understanding on how things are connected and how they're affected and impacted. And sometimes, with that example, it's just not really understanding unintended consequences when you're lining something and then you're realizing that there was a benefit that you didn't put a value on. And so now you change how you value things, and now you're looking at things differently. So that's really interesting.
That's that human ecology part, Uri.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting that. That's super exciting. If I were to go back to school, Maybe that's why my son is having that kind of conversation with me. You know, I just get excited and he's like, it's not about you, it's about me.
Hi, Mage.
You can look over his shoulder.
Yeah, trying to tell an 18-year-old what's good for him, man, it's a losing cause.
Well, and you brought up the systems, Orit, and I think part of it is people, their boundary of what they consider their system differs. And so if my boundary, the narrower it is, the fewer, I limit myself on assets. Whereas if I take a bigger boundary, then new possibilities arise that I didn't even consider.
Well, this is why something like the network that we're going to work on is such an opportunity, right? Because if you're bringing different perspective and different kind of work into a conversation, it just expands that boundary that you're discussing. There's a great opportunity there.
Amir has an honorary degree in human ecology. He practices it all the time.
Well, thank you for that. It feels right. I call it the connecting the dots, you know. And I also have come to appreciate the better listener I am, the more free advice I get. And everyone has something to share if I'm willing to listen.
Yeah. Great.
That's a good way to end.
Well,
I like that.
Very good.
That when we listen, we get to get free advice and learn and expand.
That's a human ecosystem service.
As they say, we've got 2 ears and only 1 mouth. We should use them in that proportion.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thank
Good
you
to
all.
see you all. Thank you for the
Thank you.
presentation.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.